Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of FIPP Insider New Zealand. It's been a busy 2 days. Thank you very much for joining us once again. I'll do my time check. It's 3 o'clock in New Zealand in the afternoon and about 4 o'clock in the morning here. I can just see the sun starting to come up. And on behalf of FIPP and of course our strategic partners PressReader and the Magazine Publishers Association of New Zealand, thank you once again for joining us. And thank you to everybody who's joined us over the last 2 days. We've had some of you come into every session, and that's really great to see, and we really appreciate your support. We've had 5 really interesting sessions so far, covering everything from the latest trends in media to our interview with Stuff's Sinead Boucher, and of course the things we heard earlier this afternoon on the state of the market and our interview and discussion with Gavin Ellis. And we're going to end today with a deep dive into the latest trends in content consumption and how this has changed as a result of the coronavirus crisis. It contains some fantastic insight. It's a great way for us to close the event. And of course, it comes from our friends at PressReader who have this fantastic global view of what's happening in the content market with their relationships all over the world. Before we get into that though, don't forget to go and book meetings with your fellow delegates in the deal room. It will remain open into next week, and I would encourage you once again to take advantage of this option. I also know that Steve and his colleagues at PressReader are very keen to talk to all of you in the New Zealand market and get your view on what's happening there, and he will be in touch with you after this session. In the event that you're not able to meet through the deal room, please do take a moment to talk to our friends there. This session is, like all the others, interactive, and we're keen to hear from as many of you as possible. So please don't be afraid to ask questions, and we'll answer them as best we can as we proceed through the presentation. If you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see both the Q&A and chat buttons. You know where they are by now because you've been using them throughout the sessions, and you can use these, of course, throughout this event as well. Please submit your questions, upvote questions from others that you'd like to see answered, and keep an eye on the chat box for useful links and information from the FIPP team and of course from PressReader as well. A reminder once again that if you're enjoying these sessions and would like another opportunity to hear from speakers, from world-class speakers like Nikolay and others on a variety of subjects, then don't forget to sign up to the FIPP Congress. It starts on September the 2nd. You've seen a bunch of links for that already, and there'll be some more in this session as well. We're having at least 70 speakers in that event, and there's a chance to also do some networking. The links to sign up and the agenda will be appearing in the chat. So I'm delighted to welcome as our final speakers, although one of them is speaking and one of them's listening. First of all, the international CEO of PressReader, Nikolay Malyarov, and his colleague, who many of you know in New Zealand, Steve Chapman. They're going to be telling us all about their findings in terms of content during the pandemic and usage of that and how that is changing. So I'm going to say a big welcome and a big thank you to them for joining us and hand over to Nikolay. Nikolay, take it away.
Thanks very much, James. Appreciate the intro. Delighted to be with our friends and colleagues from the other side of the world who are already living in Thursday and living in their post-COVID lives. A little bit jealous, of course, as you can imagine. Steve and I absolutely love coming to New Zealand. We wish we could be there in person. We like to break our Northern Hemisphere summer by going to New Zealand, so around end of August, September. But the good news today, it's 14 degrees here in Vancouver, Canada. It's 14 degrees in Auckland, so I think the weather has aligned, so it's almost as if we were in New Zealand. FIPP Insider are great events, especially in person, but we're obviously adjusting to the new normal, which may also include a slightly choppier transition between slides, so I do apologize in advance for that. And as you can see, the topic of the presentation it has the word conversation in it. We're hoping that this is going to be very much, as James said, an interactive session. And we're going to talk about the trusted quality content in this world and explore what's in store for it going forward. There are some familiar faces in the audience, but a lot of new ones as well. The publishing market in New Zealand has been evolving, as we've talked about over the last couple of days. So before we dive deeper into the subject, let me tell you a bit more about PressReader to those who are new. PressReader is a tech company that obviously connects people to the world's best magazine and newspaper content any way they want to get it. But in addition to growing subscriber revenue directly from readers, we also partner with tens of thousands of consumer brands who sponsor access to great content like yours on behalf of your readers. And that includes everything from hotels to airlines to cruise ships to libraries and hospitals. Basically, everywhere we are as individuals, as people. Now, in a world where the majority of people are still unwilling to pay for digital news. It's actually a very powerful business model because it closes the loop on how we monetize content and more. But we're not just a tech company. We're also a publisher in our own right of a magazine called The Insider. And I'd like to think that The Insider is a unique publication because as a company, we sit at the cross section between consumers, publishers, and consumer-facing brands. The Insider digs deep into issues that keep all of us awake at night, like retention, monetization, personalization, engagement, and experience as they relate to the publishing sector as well. Our latest edition focused, however, on retention in the hospitality segment. You may not think that this issue is appropriate for publishing, but there is actually a lot we can learn from hotels when it comes to reinventing business models and growing customer loyalty to create a more profitable future. Now, as a sneak preview of the issue, which is coming out in a couple of weeks, it's actually about sustainability. And here is the cover, which I've signed off on just yesterday. I'm happy that there was a question about sustainability in one of the presentations yesterday, because what's important to remember that sustainability is so much more than just being green. The United Nations actually set out 17 different sustainable development goals, and they feature everything from reduction of or elimination of poverty and hunger in the world to reducing inequalities and building peace and social justice. For those who are not familiar with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the roots go back to 1987, when the World Commission on Environment and Development was formed. It was led by the first female Prime Minister of Norway, Dr. Brundtland. Then they published a report called Our Common Future, also known as the Brundtland Report. In it, the Commission defined sustainable development as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, a year after the report was released, John Elkington, World Authority on Corporate Responsibility, published his book, The Green Consumer Guide. The book sold millions. It was heralded as the catalyst for modern-day sustainability movement and credited with starting the green consumer movement in America, the UK, and many other countries. It has been suggested that because of recommendations in the Brundtland Report and the success of Elkington's Green Consumer Guide, that it led to sustainable being perceived as green by consumers and business people. A decade later, Elkington published another book called Cannibals with Forks, in which he advocated that all businesses can and must help society achieve three goals: economic prosperity, environmental protection, and social equity. He coined these goals as the triple bottom line of profit, people, and planet, which has become a business sustainability framework adopted by thousands of organizations worldwide. His latest book, released earlier this year, called Green Swans, The Coming Boom in Regenerative Capitalism, explores the changing face of capitalism, democracy, and sustainability, and its impacts on business, society, and the planet. Writing this book had Elkington rethinking his triple bottom line framework from profit, people, and planet to people, planet, and prosperity. Hence, you see the cover displaying those three Ps. The Insider magazine is full of case studies, and it's entirely free on our website and on our iOS and Android apps. I hope you will check it out. In the upcoming issue, we have also a couple of spotlights on two of our publishing partners, Prisa from Spain and Hearst from the US, and how they've adopted the Sustainable Development Goals in their business. Now, enough about that. A few years back, we went through a major brand exercise as a company. One of the goals was to define our mission and our visions for the next stretch of our works. The common goal here was also to continue expanding what we've been doing since the inception of our company. That is building partnerships. And I'm glad that Sinead talked about it yesterday. Now, if we were to continue to help our publishers and creators of quality content build a sustainable future, partnerships is an important part of the solution. And partnerships involve obviously the content partners and our consumer-facing brand partners as well. We've been a partner of New Zealand publishers and brands pretty much since the company has started trading in 1999. We signed our first licensing agreement with Fairfax at the time in New Zealand in 2000. And in 2007, we launched the first branded edition, which is the white label technology that powers the digital editions for newspaper and magazine brands around the world, also with Fairfax. Since then, obviously, the relationships have been extended to now Stuff, NZME, Former Bauer, ICG, Allied Press, NZ Lifestyle Magazine Group, Adrenaline, and so many more. We're now present in more than 90% of New Zealand libraries and key hotel groups, which include Accor, like Novotel and Sofitel, Langham, Heritage, and IHG, and more. We've been a sponsor of MPA New Zealand as well. We've been proud to sponsor one of their awards as well. So we're not newcomers to the New Zealand market, and we're proud of the work that we've done in New Zealand in working with publishers and brands alike. All of this to say that we appreciate what New Zealand is as a country, as people, and the quality content that comes out of New Zealand to the world, and more on that later. Every year when we come for a visit, we talk about what we've done and set our plans for the year ahead. Since this year it's all very different, we wanted to take this opportunity to do this virtually today. Last year for our company, the focus areas has been on M&A. We acquired News 360 and Service and Native AI Technologies. News 360 is an app that was available for a few years in all of the major app stores that really focused on providing personalized access to content. The News 360 app was in turn built on native AI technology, which really dives deeper into the behavioral analytics of what content gets consumed and how it goes beyond. I like to think of it as being some Google Analytics on steroids in some ways, because it goes beyond your traditional sort of demographical data, but really dives deeper into the qualitative elements of content that gets consumed, allowing businesses and publishers to make certain business and editorial changes as well. Further, we've launched our new educational technology service by forming a company called Textbook Hub. Now, this company is one of the many areas in which we're diversifying our business as the PressReader group of companies now. Textbook Hub is focusing on developing, digitizing the educational aspects of K-12 curricula, where we can provide electronic textbooks to schools. Now, the textbooks in schools have to go much beyond the traditional sort of page flipping services that you'd normally associate with ebooks because of the integration to various sort of learning management systems. But it's interesting that when we formed this company, in some ways we were excited by the changes that are being brought in by COVID, because we can see a bright future for this technology. Part of this technology is the actual electronic textbook technology, which was built by another company also based here in Vancouver, a company called Evident Point. Now, we've been partnering with Evident Point for a number of years on a few other initiatives, but now we've acquired it last year as well, and we brought them into the fold, and the great developers that we have there. One of the most exciting elements of the Evident Point is the active textbook technology, as I mentioned. On the product side, we were working on changing the onboarding experience for PressReader users. Now, that's now integrating those native AI analytics and the personalization aspects, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to focus on is providing a much more relevant content, to surface more relevant content to the readers out of the sea of content, really diving deep into the discoverability of content that we can provide on the surface. And we have also completely redesigned our branded editions service, which is what I mentioned earlier, is the white label element of our technology that powers the digital editions of key newspapers and magazines around the world. I'm proud to say that the redesign that we have done and the integration of new elements, such as the breaking news into the service, has also helped one of our publishers in the US win an award, an innovation award, earlier this year. We also continue to work hard on growing hard-to-reach verticals, and this is really what PressReader for, is developing the relationships with these consumer-facing businesses around the world, where we can present the content, the quality content that you produce, and monetize it, and help with the discoverability of that content. We also launched several new gifted issue campaigns on the heels of a successful one that we've executed in South Africa with Hague Whiskey and GQ on the other side. Now, that campaign was where you would buy a bottle of Hague Whiskey at one of the local liquor shops. On the neck of the bottle, there would be a little booklet that would have a QR code. And so it was a gift with purchase. You would scan a QR code, you would get access to GQ, digital version of GQ magazine on PressReader. So what we've done last year is we launched a similar campaign with one of the local wineries here in British Columbia, and a major supermarket chain in BC. And so with the purchase of a wine from that supermarket chain, you got there was a neck tag that you can see that featured a QR code. And then by scanning the QR code, you would get access to a digital edition of a Decanter magazine. Now, Decanter magazine is based in the UK, and so obviously their traditional distribution area for the magazine has been the UK and continental Europe. So for the first time, Decanter could really access the market of wine lovers, a very relatable, obviously, market of wine lovers here in British Columbia. But it was much more than that. The reason why we've partnered with a local winery is because it was the first Canadian winery that was featured by the Decanter magazine in one of the listings that they do, because obviously it's a very prominent publication on all things wine. So for the publisher, obviously it helped them reach new readers outside of their core distribution market. For the winery itself, it helped strengthen their position as a premium wine in Canada and provided a more meaningful connection with customers. For wine lovers, it obviously gave them something tangible, which was the gifted access to the world's leading wine magazine. We did something similar with 442 magazine at a soccer match between Argentina and Chile at the LA Coliseum last summer. Every attendee got a copy of 442 together with a match program on PressReader with no strings attached. The common thread amongst all of these campaigns have been that they were quick, inexpensive, relevant, scalable, and quite simple to execute, really. Another thing that we've continued to focus on is we're enhancing our compiled edition technology. Now, in some ways, it may look like a step backwards because what we're doing is we're repurposing the web content and producing a digestible, finite piece of content that end users can download. We launched this originally with The Guardian in Australia, which, as you know very well, don't have a print product in the market. They only have the editorial service. Because we're working with airlines where the offline access to content is an important part of that passenger journey, we extended the invitation to The Guardian to be the first customer of ours. So what we've done is we've created a product that looked and felt like a print edition that you could download onto your device before your flight, that you can read cover to cover, which was also handy for people who didn't want to live in a 24-hour news cycle. And as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, the look and feel of that publication was very much like The Guardian of the UK. So we were really building out on the brand and the trust that was associated with that brand. Last year, we extended the same service to The Guardian in the US as well, and also to Deutsche Welle, which is the German language broadcaster, which again doesn't exist in print. It's not your traditional publisher, but they produce great quality content in multiple languages. And so now you can download that content and have it available in a quasi-physical, but very finite and very digestible way as well. Now, of course, here came COVID, and the most important lesson that we've learned post-COVID is that goodwill is good business. We launched the hashtag associated with it, which was PressReader Cares. And we've launched that hashtag in a number of different verticals that I'll talk to in a second. But what happened during this time is that we realized that perhaps not as a company, but perhaps in some specific verticals that we're working in, and certainly in the publishing sector, we were going through the existential crisis. Nothing is what it was and never will be, and we've accepted that. And as we tried to make sense of it, we found ourselves paralyzed by fear and indecision when we should have been embracing diversification even more and adapting faster to this strange proverbial new normal. In the publishing segment, obviously digital transformations that are already underway, they need to accelerate, and we all know that. That's understandable. And dependency on advertising, and I would argue a direct subscription revenue post-COVID-19 is not sustainable on their own, and there is a growing need for sustainability, for diversification for us to remain sustainable. Helen Keller once said that alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. It's very true. From looking at how we'll be supporting our existing clients to seeing where the opportunities arose in building supportive relationships with new ones as well. That's the lessons that we've learned. And for every door that closed, a new one opened up. So let me tell you a little bit more about our experiences. It's been a very wild ride, as you can imagine. We'll continue to work from home, and as much as Canada didn't go through the same sort of lockdowns as a lot of other countries, let alone our neighbors to the south, we still did our part to flattening the curve, and we've done it fairly successfully, although we're still a long ways away from it, beating this thing. But what we also saw was that some of our highest revenue generating verticals, the travel related ones, the hospitality, cruise ships, ferry lines, and airlines, were under immense stress and threat, which was scary, and can't deny that. But what was also, we're seeing that there are new opportunities that are opening up in other consumer focused sectors, property management, healthcare, loyalty programs, care homes. At the end of the day, we needed to find new ways of reaching the readers and building on the loyalty. In an act of goodwill, many of our publishing partners asked us to also open up their content for free, which we and the readers very much appreciated. These are some of the partners that have asked us to do that. One of our local partners here in Canada has also asked whether we'd be willing to forego our newspapers and education fees that would traditionally charge for their digital edition, for their branded edition, because they wanted to give the service to school children who were now trying to learn at home. Of course, we've agreed and done that. Meanwhile, as we supported our brand partners, most of whom, especially as I said, in the travel sector, were hit particularly hard by this pandemic. We've extended the access that you'd normally get as part of your travel experience with airlines, but now you would have gotten it from home as part of your loyalty relationship with key airlines around the world. We've done similar things with our marine clients, and in fact, gotten some new clients as a result. For instance, Holland America, who were not a client before the pandemic, they had quarantined passengers on their ships for weeks on, and in fact, some of those passengers have unfortunately passed during that time. You can imagine the stress that these people were going through. So we've extended access, complimentary access to passengers and crew alike on these ships, and the reaction that we've seen was of immense gratitude, which we're very happy about. That's exactly what we're going for. Same thing happened with other marine clients. And the hotels have been an amazing supporter of the frontline healthcare worker, and some of them have been converted to makeshift hospitals. So we've extended access to patients and healthcare workers and guests at those hotels to provide them access to trusted quality content during the time, but also as a mean of escapism, which we'll touch upon in a second. Libraries all over the world are sharing a renewed commitment to serve their diverse communities. The old paradigm of them being guardians of books has transformed them into being guardians of people, and I would argue democracy as well. Some were turning their buildings into food banks and shelters, while others were using their 3D printers to print face shield headbands for healthcare workers. And so we wanted to support those efforts. And a lot of libraries that, especially in the areas that were in lockdown, obviously they couldn't provide the services in branches anymore. But we were able to support with our technology remote access to the service, and the usage has skyrocketed. The type of usage has changed as well, and we're going to get to this in a second. A couple of new verticals that we launched into were healthcare and aged care, the verticals that were quite heavily affected by this pandemic as well. And some new ones and some innovative ones were with military installations around the world, including our partnership with the British Forces Broadcasting Service that supports British military stationed around the world, everywhere from the Falkland Islands to Cyprus and everywhere in between. We had a number of publishers reach out to us and asked very quickly to build kiosks of their publications, Televisa in Mexico and Latin America being one of them, because again, they wanted to provide complementary access to content in a way in those areas where they couldn't provide access to print editions anymore. And we've done that very, very quickly. And at the end of the day, what we saw was the need, which was also highlighted by Sinead and Gavin and some others, for quality content, which informed and entertained. We tried to adjust to the proverbial new normal, and in some ways wanted to open this up to the world in more ways than one, and created the PressReader Covers video segment as well. We've done an interview with our staff as to how they were adjusting to working from home. We've also done one with a familiar face to this community, Sarah Tuck, who talked about the changing world of publishing and creating of content, distributing content in the age of the pandemic. And we can share that interview with you later. Oops, sorry. Speaking of the need for quality content, we want to talk about it with all of you. We wanted this part to be a bit more interactive. We'll show you what we have done, what we've seen over the course of the past 5 to 6 months, but we wanted to hear what you have seen. So please use the chat option on in your Zoom and comment. I appreciate it's a bit tough for us to adjust to the virtual setting, but we're hoping that that'll be helpful. The graph that you're seeing here is we're looking at the way the content as it was consumed in the local market. Now, the different metrics that we're using, obviously, and using our native AI technology, is that we're basing our analytics on the whole aggregate of content that we distribute. Now, as you've seen, we've distributed more than 7,000 newspapers and magazines from all around the world. So some of the data that you will see might not necessarily match what you see on your specific level, but we want to give you another side of the coin so you can see from, a little bit from our perspective. So as I said, here we looked at content as it was consumed in the local market. So the content that was produced in New Zealand, Australia, Canada, US, and the UK, and consumed in their respective markets. Now, I appreciate that it's a little bit difficult to read, so I'll give you a little bit of a hint. So it starts from January 1st, goes through the 15th of June on the right-hand side. And the top line is the UK, followed by Australia, then followed by the US, then Canada and New Zealand. Now, I'm asking you to avoid looking at the absolute numbers, looking at the trends specifically. And the trends that we're seeing here is obviously you can see the big spikes happening sort of around end of March, beginning of April. And this was obviously the time, as you might recall, when a lot of these areas were going into various stages of lockdown. But as much as we have seen the spike in Australia, US, UK, and Canada, we're seeing that the New Zealand consumption has stayed fairly flat. It's not because the New Zealanders were reading the same amount of content as they read before. It's just the amount of content that was available to them to read was a lot less than in other countries. So even though there has been a spike in the overall consumption of content, and we'll show that to you in some other tables, the availability of content produced in New Zealand was much more limited, as you're well aware. On the more global level, here's what we've seen. We saw subscriptions rise as more people started reading from home. The average sessions that you see here, they nearly doubled since the pandemic hit us. Again, a true testament that quality, trusted content was now more important and more desired than ever. What was also notable for us was that more magazines were consumed since the self-isolation took effect. And content choices changed as well, as I've alluded to a number of times today. What we saw trending in January and what we saw 4 or 5 months later were miles apart. Again, looking at the global level, and the intersection of interest between New Zealand and overseas readers. The next 2 slides will show you the top read categories in New Zealand from New Zealand publications and in New Zealand from global publications in January in comparison to May. So you see the top 5 categories. There are similarities between the two. And I would note, however, that the health conditions came in dead last in January for Kiwi readers from New Zealand sources. Why it's important, I'll mention it in a second. I'm mentioning this because the interest in this category increased massively in New Zealand just 4 months later. And although it didn't make the top 5, as you've seen in the previous 2 slides, this category experienced the highest growth, especially coupled with health as the category overall. You'll note a disproportionately higher increase in these 2 categories as they were consumed in New Zealand from overseas publications, however. Then, of course, comes the question whether magazines are an essential service during the pandemic. Different jurisdictions approached this differently, and even in Canada, there were provinces which treated all type of content as essential, British Columbia being one of them. Others only applied this label to newspapers and news gathering organizations like TV and radio, and have just sort of were quiet on the magazine side. But we haven't seen what you've seen in New Zealand, where certain types of magazines were excluded from being considered to be an essential service. Anecdotally, why we saw an increase in the number of subscribers and users, data proves, however, that the readers were looking for not only trusted quality content that informed them beyond news bites and summaries of press conferences, but content which has entertained them and provided a mean of escapism. Now, if you take a look at this table, we've highlighted Australia, Canada, UK, and the US, again, the same markets that we've looked at before. This slide shows you the top topics read by country, looking at magazines only, not looking at newspapers, in May 2020. And so you see that the categories, the top 5 categories in these 4 markets were pretty similar. There are a few slight differences, but they're pretty similar. And now take a look at New Zealand in comparison. Look how different the content has been as consumed by New Zealand readers from locally produced content. Again, it's just there was a lack of locally produced content that has been consumed by others. There was a need for a lighter side of the content, the entertainment, the celebrities, the healthy living, the food, etc. It wasn't because the Kiwis were somehow disinterested in lighter content. No, it's just that content has diminished greatly in the overall availability, as far as the availability that we had in PressReader. I mentioned earlier about native AI, the technology that we have acquired last year as a company. I wanted to highlight how we look at content and to show that it goes beyond the broad categories. Take a look at the health-related content. For reference, in January, PressReader users have read about 350,000 articles about health on PressReader. What you see here, the visualization that the native AI technology provides, it shows that by the end of March, the number has jumped to close to 1.4 million. But take a look at all aspects of health-related matters that we're interested in, including infectious diseases, and that you'll see in a second. And another subcategory, mental health issues. That's not a coincidence. And now we're seeing a broader conversation around the world about the effects of lockdowns, the adjustment to working from homes, and the pandemic overall. How these issues, the mental health issues, are becoming front and center. The reason why we're showing this to you as a recording from March, we showed it in another webinar that we've done with FIPP, but it was very well received. We want to give you a preview of what that native AI type analytics provides, that sort of a deep dive where you go in and it looks at over 1 million different touch points in just the English language. And it starts from a very broad category and then goes further down and goes to a very granular level for publishers to be able to see. Now here comes the interactive session. What's next? We would love to hear from you. And again, I appreciate that it's a little bit difficult to do it virtually. So perhaps some of the questions that we're posing here would be the questions that could spark a conversation offline post the webinar. We always love having this conversation, which is why we go to New Zealand at least once, sometimes twice a year. But we'd love to see what trends have you seen over the past 5 months. We've seen a preview of that in the previous session, of course, but on your level, what you've seen, what are your readers asking for? And more importantly, what's on your radar for 2021 and beyond? For us, what's next is we're looking at a better analytics integration so we can provide a much deeper personalization of content, because readers continue to be faced with more content than ever today. And it's important for us to provide the technology that allows for a higher quality content to surface up to the top, because unfortunately it's that crap that cesspool of subpar quality content that's unfortunately pushing that quality content down. And we're continuing to invest into the tech that surfaces that content, that most important content, which hopefully will provide new ways of monetizing that content as well. We're going to be expanding the content type offerings on PressReader as well. We're looking at going beyond newspapers, magazines, and web sources. We're planning on adding books, video, and audio to the mix, because we're seeing that the behavioral changes that have started a bit before the pandemic, they're sticking around and they're going to continue stronger. And the next thing that we're going to focus on this year are looking at stronger synergies between the educational space and newspapers and magazines. Now that we've developed the sales force that goes and sells our technology into the K-12 space, into all the different schools around the world, for us to be able to marry the traditional sort of textbook experience for pupils with quality trusted content that comes from newspapers and magazines, we see that that'll be of huge, as an evolution of newspapers and magazines and education, that will be of value as well. Last but not least, we'll continue investing further into our branded edition technology, make it even more flexible for our publishing partners to use, and continue expanding this offering all around the world, as we're already doing. The question that we always ask when we come to New Zealand or when we have any sort of meetings with our publishing partners is, how can we support you better? And what is it that you are looking for in a post-COVID world? Again, I appreciate that it might be difficult to have a deeper engagement that we would normally have in the face-to-face insider sessions, but we would certainly would love to hear back from you. And I hope that this webinar will encourage you to do something different in your business. I hope that you will hear us and learn lessons from us about the power of goodwill and the investment into these relationships, and sometimes it's worth investing money to reap the rewards later on, even though it seems like such an odd thing to do, to invest at the time of crises. But remember that as PressReader and as your trusted partner, that we're always available to help out. So let's talk. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Nikolay. Wonderful presentation as always. Some really great and insightful data in there. And I guess contact details are there on the screen. So if people do want to get in touch with Nick and with Steve to give them their views on what's happening in the market and how PressReader can help you, then please do get in touch with them direct on those email addresses. There are some links in the chat as well to some of PressReader's websites, particularly about.pressreader.com, which will tell you a little bit more about the company. And then Steve has just posted a link there to a YouTube video of the latest PressReader covers with Dish, which you can go and have a look at there. So Nick, thank you very much for that. Really insightful presentation. We don't have any questions from the audience, but I guess one question from me, which is just to finish on, what's your take on how you think the kind of general post-lockdown environment is going to emerge for media businesses? And perhaps if you could stop sharing your screen as well, then we can get you to answer that question on.
Absolutely.
On that.
I mean, look, the one thing that's inevitable is we're going to see more shakeups around the world. I mean, what we've seen in New Zealand is a precursor to what's going to happen in other countries. And that's the unfortunate part in some ways, because as we've highlighted, the need for quality, trust, and content is arguably higher now than it has ever been. What seems to be suffering the most these days is the production and distribution of local content, and that's very concerning. What we're also hoping, however, is that as maybe a silver lining of this consolidation in the market, is that we're going to see stronger, perhaps arguably higher quality content coming out of these stronger players. The other part that we're seeing, and there's some encouraging news from various of research organizations that have come out last week, is that the propensity to pay for content, what we've seen over the past few months, it is likely to stick. And that's encouraging. Now, as a company, we focused obviously on readers who'd pay. I mean, we've had a paid-for product since the inception of the company, and we've strongly advocated for monetizing the content. But we've done quite a bit about developing verticals where those who are unable or unwilling to pay for content are still getting access to it where somebody else is paying for it. So I think we're going to see more and more of the diversification of sort of revenue sources that are coming out. But on the direct-to-consumer side, as I said, the propensity to pay for content is growing, and fingers crossed it's going to stick around.
Definitely, and that's been a theme, I think, throughout the last 2 days, the need to move to a model where consumers are paying for content. Yeah. So let's hope that now finally emerges, particularly in the lifestyle and entertainment space. So
yes, I found that really, really interesting, Nikolay. Sorry to butt in there, James, but I found that really interesting, the different types of contents that are being consumed in New Zealand. And then just to talk briefly to your question about what trends are we seeing here, I think one of the little trends that we've seen, which perhaps that explains, is that since lockdown, we've seen a great embracing of the lifestyle content, that there's almost been a pent-up desire for it. So I know New Zealand House and Garden has had some absolute bumper issues, as has Dish. And yeah, so I'm hoping that that's going to be a rebound as a result of that. But that explains it, I think, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, and my hope, obviously, one of the reasons why we wanted to showcase this is obviously New Zealand has given us very different data compared to other countries, and we could explain it in some ways. But I'm also hoping is that you'll see that there is so much data that we can provide that supports the argument before those in power to say that, look, you can't make just the newsy magazines to be essential service. Yeah. There's more content that people seek and people frankly need at these times, and so it's very difficult to go against the data, isn't it? So hopefully, if God forbid the next lockdown does happen, perhaps there's going to be a very different approach to these things.
Well, that's certainly true. And I was looking at that information and wishing that the MPA had it at hand when we were trying to convince the government to reconsider that decision. So maybe if it does happen again, we'll have that there. Yeah, and the other thing, I guess, just further to your point about what PressReader can do to further support New Zealand publishers, I would just say more of the same. I think that my regular chats that I have with Steve Chapman give great insight, great global insights that we can use in New Zealand and that we always end up sharing with our members. So yeah, thank you very much for your ongoing support.
We do have a question, Nick. Sorry to interrupt. We've got a question from the audience from Linley Belton. Thank you, Linley, for your question. She's saying, I presume it's a she, might be a he, apologies.
Yes.
I guess the biggest challenge we all face is how we take digital edition engagement from 7 minutes to closer to the 60 minutes of a print edition. Our team focused on improving the design elements of our digital edition over lockdown to make them easier to read, but that didn't really lead to many converts. Do you have a view on how we improve engagement with digital editions, Nick?
I think and I'm sure that Steve would love to contribute as well. I think that one part, is really harnessing the power of a digital edition in the flexibility that comes with it. The additional content that has traditionally been produced but has never made it into the print edition in terms of the additional photos, the videos, all of that content, the audio can fit into the digital edition. And I would argue that it raises not just the value perception of the product, but also the engagement time. We have provided the technology to do that. More and more publishers are trying to use this technology. Certainly something that we can do as a company to make it even more seamless as a way to integrate that content. But it is interesting because the average reading time of digital editions does tend to vary across a number of publications, and we've seen it diverging, that even in the same market there will be publications that go into the 25-40 minute range, and some that are staying at 5 to 10 minute range. One thing I would add is that the digital editions on phones are a lot easier to just flip through, and the form factor does play into it. I can see that Steve has unmuted himself, so I'm sure he'd love to say something.
Yeah, I was actually just going to add the same thing to that, what we've seen over the last kind of 5 years is that it's essential for publishers to maintain that print format. So while you are enhancing it with additional video, photo, etc., when you start to move away from that print format, specifically with magazines, you start to lose the engagement because, especially Lindley with lifestyle type publications, people are looking for something that is a complete package that they can start, that they can finish, that they can put a bookmark in the middle, that they know they worked their way through, and that they're going to come back to regularly. The other key thing that we've seen too is that the usage in apps is much stronger than it is on the web itself. Maybe it's because you get distracted more while you're online. There's more things popping up. You've got Slack, you've got WhatsApp, you've got all these things coming up. Whereas when you're inside the app and consuming the magazine in full screen mode, you don't have those disturbances. And so people do spend more time there. So a big part of it is again, maintaining that format and trying to encourage them to head into the app environment where they're going to come back to it both, after download, but when they're in offline environments, when they have that time while they're sitting on public transit or waiting for, for an appointment, etc., these things create that increased engagement. And especially with women, the research that we've seen over the years shows that women very much enjoy that packaged experience more than men over women. So
fantastic. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. So that, I think, just about wraps up FIPP Insider New Zealand for this year. A huge thank you to all of our speakers, and our speakers today, of course, Nikolay and Steve, from our strategic partners at PressReader for their support. And of course, a big thank you to all of you for attending. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and view these sessions, and I hope you found them useful. And a particularly big thank you to Sally Duggan at MPA New Zealand. It's so important that we support our national associations, and this event literally wouldn't have happened without her taking the initiative to get us to do it. So the presentations from the event will be shared with you afterwards. Keep an eye on your email for the links to download these. And I would encourage you also to sign up for our newsletter, which you can do at fipp.com. It's by far the best way to keep abreast of the latest happenings in our sector and FIPP's latest activity. All of the sessions from this week have been recorded. They'll be available on our YouTube channel. That's FIPP World at YouTube. And they should be going up in the next week or so. Please also take a moment to follow us on Twitter at FIPP World and at FIPP CEO. And if you want to get in touch with us, you can email me, of course, at james@fipp.com. We hope to see all of you at the FIPP Congress in September. And of course, we hope to be there to run this event in person once again next year in New Zealand. But until then, as the sun comes up through my window here, thank you very much for joining. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you all very soon. Goodbye.